Welcome back to Talk Today. The time is 8:25. We'll have the papers for you in just a moment. But here's what else is coming up on today's show.
The Princess of Wales appeared in public last night for the first time since being named in the Dutch version of Omid Scobie's book. Royal commentator Afia Hagen joins us at 8:45.
Matt Hancock appeared before the COVID inquiry yesterday. The Spectator's Cindy Yu will break down Hancock's inquiry after 9.
And broadcasting royalty joins us at 9:20. Talk Sport's new breakfast presenter, the legend that is Jeff Stelling, will tell us all about his new show. The broadcaster Matthew Stadlen and writer Emma Wolfe are with us for a final look through this morning's papers. Sorry, I didn't quite give you the build-up that I gave Jeff Stelling there, did I? What are we going to kick off with? Yeah.
Not at all.
Not in the slightest.
The man is a legend.
Matthew, we're going to start with The Guardian and a warning from the UN Refugee Agency about the implications of the strike on southern Gaza. We now know the ceasefire has come to an end and the conflict is back on.
So the horrors of what's been happening in the Middle East are sort of perfectly laid out here. You've got hostages, Israeli hostages, and their stories on the right, and unimaginable, unthinkable what every single one of them have gone through, and many of them, as we were talking about earlier, are still going through. Then in the middle, you've got the humanitarian catastrophe, and I think that's the right word, that is unfolding. It has been unfolding now for some time in southern Gaza, where most of the population of that narrow strip, which is, I think, about 4.5 miles at its narrowest point, I mean, it's just so, it's a sliver of a strip. Almost all that population is now in the south, and Israel intends, it seems, to attack Hamas in the south. And the UN is very clear, it seems here, at least this gentleman, Philippe Lazzarini, that this is a disaster, and that he really worries about what will happen in this next phase of the war.
And I think that's the point, isn't it, Emma? It's very easy to be glib, to see the pictures, to talk about the numbers of people on the move in southern Gaza. But I think when it really strikes you is when you see a hostage released and the joy of those families being reunited. It really comes home.
It gives you goosebumps. And we've been focused, as you say, for so long on the numbers, on the exchange, on all of that, and whether the truce could be negotiated, whether it might hold. But when we started seeing those hostages being released, it made the personal stories so personal. And, you know, everyone started following that little baby, following the progress of that little baby, the 10-month-old Kafir, who had apparently started to walk, just started to walk at 10 months. But I don't know, as a mother, I just started, you know, imagining how the children, looking after babies is quite a. You can't do that in an underground tunnel in the darkness, running out of water, running out of food.
On the question of the numbers, we also do see the individual stories coming out of Gaza as well. And as a parent myself, when I see a baby or a child that has gone through what these children have gone through, whether it's Israeli or Palestinian, I have exactly the same reaction. But what we have to bear in mind when we see figures like thousands of children have been killed in Gaza, that each one of those children is as valuable as my child or your child, any of our children.
We're talking about trying to minimise casualties. The Israeli army said this morning that with the resumption of fighting, it has now published a map to advise Gazans of safe areas for their evacuation. Emma, I just don't know what must be going through their minds, because it's fine to be, to give you a map of where to go, but the horror of war and the panic as it sets in, and as you rightly say, it's a tiny landmass anyway, and everyone fighting for their own freedom.
And we also have to remember resources running out, power, water, food, all of the supplies, essential supplies that are running low when you have that amount of people crammed into a tiny area.
The World Health Organization warning of, you know, terrible spread of disease. Now this humanitarian catastrophe. You've got 9,000 people per square kilometre.
It's worth remembering, guys, that the Israeli government is a far-right government, and it is a government that has overseen illegal settlement after illegal settlement in the West Bank. Netanyahu, it is thought, part of his policy was to keep Hamas in place a while ago. So on the one hand, you've got this far-right government, and on the other hand, you've got a death cult in charge of Gaza. So how we manage somehow to find the hope for peace, let alone peace itself, is really difficult.
Well, isn't that the point with Blinken saying to Israel, be very thoughtful about your next move? And of course, everyone talking about a two-state solution. I think you're right in terms of the strategy and what Netanyahu's done in the past. But let's move on if we can. This is in the Daily Telegraph. Emma, the BBC accused of alienating working-class audiences. I read this and thought, I'm not surprised.
I was not surprised by this story at all. I mean, it's interesting. This is a poll that's found, basically the working class are turning off the BBC. They find it far too... they find themselves stereotyped in it, but also they're not happy about highly paid, very, very overpaid, I would say, presenters. They feel that their money is being absolutely wasted and that they're fed up with the political correctness of BBC programmes and this so-called, balance, this so-called impartiality. And I think people feel fed up of being sort of finger-wagged and lectured at.
There is a sense, according to viewers from poorer backgrounds quoted in this article, that disproportionately high salaries, adding to the sense that it's run by an exclusive upper-class group of white men. We had a lot of stories about the BBC this week, with changes to Newsnight being made, but also the 5 Live presenter, Nihal Arthanaika, talking about the very white-dominated nature of working at the BBC and the impact that has on him personally as someone who works there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, because I worked at the BBC for nearly 9 years. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure it was a mostly white organisation. What I would say in its defence was that it tried to get things right. It tried to be balanced, but we're all human beings. So, of course, sort of subconscious biases might creep in. It's also important to remember that the working classes don't speak with one voice. There's a huge diversity in outlook amongst working class Brits, just as there are in, say, middle-class Brits.
But I also worked there for a very long time. Do you not get the sense the BBC has actually completely lost its direction? Certainly when I was there, it was about those Reithian principles of informing, educating, entertainment. And then they tried to go for the youth audience. They brought in BBC Three, then they ditched BBC Three. Now BBC Three is back. Do they actually know what they're doing?
No, I mean, and I still work at the BBC freelance, so I have to be kind of not very careful what I say because I don't really care. But I think things like things like cutting back on Newsnight. There are popular programmes. There are people who watch that. You're not going to make it more popular and more digital.
Emma, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because we're going to interrupt that because we're heading to Dubai.